All right, get ready because we're about to take a deep dive into some intense stuff today. Exodus 10, the plagues of locusts and darkness. Picking up right where we left off, Israelites still stuck in Egypt, Moses demanding their release. And Pharaoh, well, let's just say he's not making things easy. You've probably heard this story before, but I think we're going to find some details you may have missed.
It's crazy how Exodus isn't just some ancient story. I mean, it really digs into these timeless themes. Power, resistance, divine intervention, things that still resonate today, wouldn't you say?
No doubt about it. Everyone's felt powerless or faced a tough decision at some point. But let's get back to the drama. We've already seen Pharaoh resist 7 plagues, and now things escalate with the 8th one, locusts. And not just a few here and there. We're talking a full-blown biblical swarm, a sky black with insects, devouring every single plant. Exodus 10.1c even says there had been no locusts like them before, nor will there be such ever again.
It's wild how locusts weren't just a random nuisance back then, like in ancient cultures. They were often seen as divine judgment, like a punishment from the gods. So when these locusts hit Egypt, it's not just crops being destroyed, it's like a huge symbolic message.
So even Pharaoh's advisors start freaking out. They see the total devastation. They understand this is way beyond normal. They're practically begging Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. But Pharaoh, he hesitates.
This is where things get really fascinating. You've got Pharaoh's advisors terrified seeing God's hand at work. But Pharaoh himself, he's still clinging to his power, not ready to give up or admit defeat.
Yeah, he's definitely got that my way or the highway thing going on. So he tries to negotiate with Moses, offers to let the men go, but not the women, kids, or livestock. Like, hey, I'll give you a little freedom, but only on my why terms.
Classic power move, right? Trying to divide and conquer. But there's something else going on here that we often miss. Pharaoh actually suspects Moses is planning a rebellion. He sees this exodus as a political threat, not just a religious thing. Remember Exodus 10.do11, where Pharaoh accuses Moses of plotting against him.
So it's not just pride or stubbornness. He actually believes Moses is a threat to his authority. Makes you wonder if his resistance is more about fear of losing control than lack of faith.
Exactly. Adds a whole new layer to the story. But going back to the locusts for a sec, Exodus says an east wind brought them, and a west wind took them away after Moses prayed. This deliberate control over nature, it really emphasizes divine intervention. It's not just bad luck, it's targeted.
Okay, so the locusts are gone, the land is wrecked. You'd think even Pharaoh would get the message right. And for a minute, it seems like he does. He even admits he messed up and asks Moses to pray for him.
A little spark of humility, like he's recognizing something bigger than himself. But then the text says, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he changes his mind again.
Whoa, hold on a second. So is Pharaoh making his own choices, or is God controlling him? I'm getting a little confused here.
Well, now we're getting into one of the biggest debates about Exodus. Free will versus divine intervention. Was Pharaoh really free to choose? Or is his destiny already set? Some scholars say God hardening Pharaoh's heart shows God's power, showing even the most powerful ruler answers to God.
So it's more about showing God's power, not taking away Pharaoh's free will. That's interesting. But either way, Pharaoh backtracks, setting the stage for the 9th plague, darkness.
And this isn't just your typical nighttime. Exodus describes a darkness so thick you could feel it. 3 days. Egypt completely covered in this heady, disorienting darkness. It's a full-on sensory experience, almost psychological torture, and a huge contrast to the light the Israelites have in their homes.
So even in this plague, there's this visual reminder of the difference between those who follow God and those who don't. Israelites have light. Egyptians are stumbling in the dark. It's a pretty powerful image, right?
Absolutely. It speaks to spiritual blindness, the darkness that can take over when you don't acknowledge something bigger than yourself.
But even in this literal and metaphorical darkness, Pharaoh tries to bargain again. He says he'll let the people go, but guess what? He still wants to keep their livestock.
It's almost funny, isn't it? He's getting closer to letting them go, but he's holding on to his possessions for dear life. What do you think's going through his head at this point?
Okay, so we've got locusts as divine judgment, darkness representing spiritual blindness, and Pharaoh stuck in this loop of bargaining and backing out. Where do we go from here? This feels like it's about to explode.
You're right, the tension is definitely building. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll see how this power struggle reaches its climax.
I can't wait. Back again for more of our Exodus deep dive.
Where we left off, Pharaoh was dealing with the plague of darkness, still trying to make a deal with Moses.
He's acting like he's haggling over a price, instead of facing reality. What I find interesting is that even with all that pressure, he still can't fully give in. What do you think is holding him back?
That's the question, isn't it? Scholars have been trying to figure that out for ages. Some say Pharaoh's just too proud, too stubborn. He's used to being in charge, the one who makes all the decisions. Giving in to Moses would mean he lost, that he's admitting there's a power bigger than him.
Yeah, I can see that. It'd be a huge blow to his ego, especially in front of everyone. But what about the theological side of this? We were talking about God hardening Pharaoh's heart. Does that mean Pharaoh didn't actually have a choice?
That's the core of the debate. Free will versus divine intervention. Some interpretations suggest God's manipulating Pharaoh, making him defiant. Others argue God's just letting Pharaoh follow his own path, letting him see where his choices lead.
So it's not that God's forcing Pharaoh's hand, but more like letting him experience the consequences.
Exactly. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Yeah.
You know it's going to happen, but you can't do anything to stop it. Pharaoh's basically on a collision course.
Okay, so there's this interplay between Pharaoh being stubborn and the idea that God's involved. But we can't forget about the human cost. The Israelites are still slaves, suffering because of Pharaoh. What does this story tell us about power and how it can be abused?
Exodus really criticizes unchecked authority. Pharaoh's portrayed as a tyrant, putting his own needs above his people's well-being, holding on to power, even when it's hurting his own land.
It's definitely a warning, right? A reminder that power can corrupt and that leaders need to use their power responsibly and fairly.
Absolutely. And it also makes you think about resistance. The Israelites are going through so much, but they keep their faith. They don't give up hope. They stand up to Pharaoh, demanding freedom and dignity.
Their resilience is incredible. It shows how powerful it can be when people come together, even when things seem impossible.
And we can't forget Moses in all of this. He's like a mediator between God and Pharaoh, a voice for those who don't have one. His faith and determination are truly inspiring.
He's a true leader, that's for sure. He doesn't back down, even when he's threatened. But back to Pharaoh. He's had chances to stop all this suffering, but he's still holding on to the Israelites' livestock. Why is that so important to him?
It seems like a small detail, but it actually says a lot. Back then, livestock meant wealth and power. Letting go of those animals would be a huge loss for Pharaoh, both economically and symbolically. It would mean he's not in control, that he's been humbled.
So it's not just about the animals. It's about what it looks like to everyone else. It's about keeping up the appearance of power.
Exactly. For Pharaoh, looking powerful is everything. He can't stand the thought of appearing weak, not to his people, and maybe even more importantly, not to himself.
It's really interesting to think about. His stubbornness isn't just about being practical. It's connected to who he thinks he is.
Right. And this brings us to the 9th plague, the plague of darkness. This darkness is described as so thick it could be felt. It covers all of Egypt for 3 whole days.
It's such a vivid image, full of symbolism. On one hand, it's God showing his power, showing he can control nature itself.
But it's also something deeper. It's about spiritual darkness, the blindness that can happen when you refuse to see the truth, when you hold on to power and ignore other people's suffering.
So this plague, it's not just physical punishment. It represents what's going on inside Pharaoh, the darkness that's consuming him.
Exactly. And in this heavy darkness, even Pharaoh seems unsure. He makes another offer to let the people go. This time, he'll let them take their kids. But he still wants to keep the livestock.
He's getting closer, though, right? It's like he's trying to find some middle ground, trying to save face, but still hold on to some control.
It's a fascinating back and forth, but Moses sticks to his mission. He says they have to take their flocks and herds. He emphasizes how important these animals are for their worship, their sacrifices.
He's not just fighting for their freedom. He's fighting for their right to practice their religion, to keep their cultural identity.
Exactly. This commitment to their beliefs. It's a major theme in Exodus. It's about more than just escaping physically. It's about spiritual freedom.
It makes you think about what's really important to us, the principles we'd fight for, even when things seem impossible.
Right. And in this tense moment, Pharaoh makes a big decision. He rejects Moses' demands, banishes him, and threatens to kill him if he comes back.
So that's it for peaceful solutions. Pharaoh's made his choice, and the consequences are about to get serious.
This is a turning point, a point of no return. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore the last plague, the one that finally breaks Pharaoh and sets the Israelites free.
This is getting intense. Back again for the final part of our Exodus deep dive. We've been through a lot with these plagues. It's been pretty wild so far, wouldn't you say? Locusts, darkness, and now things are going to get even more serious.
Yeah, we've seen Pharaoh resist, try to bargain, have those little moments of humility, but then his heart hardens again. It's a repeating cycle, pulling him closer and closer to disaster.
It makes you think about times in your own life, doesn't it? When you've dug your heels in, refused to see what's right in front of you, maybe even felt that stubborn pull yourself.
Well,
What is it about us humans that makes us want to be in control so much, even when it's obviously not working?
that's one of the things that makes Exodus so relevant even today. It's not just some old story. It reflects our own struggles. Pride, power, the difficulty of letting go.
So to recap where we left off, Pharaoh's just banished Moses, threatened to kill him if he comes back. Feels like there's no turning back, like all hope for a peaceful solution is gone.
And yet even now, there's still a tiny bit of hope. Remember, Moses has been begging Pharaoh to let God's people go. He's given warnings, prayed for relief from the plagues, tried to appeal to Pharaoh's sense of reason and compassion.
It just seems like Pharaoh's too stubborn by this point.
Mm-mm.
Trapped in his own pride and fear.
Yeah.
Can't see the bigger picture.
But that's the point of Exodus. It's not only about Pharaoh's downfall, it's also about God's commitment to his people, even when things seem hopeless, even when humans are at their most stubborn. God's plan keeps moving forward.
So even though things look bad, there's still this feeling that something bigger is happening, a divine plan that goes beyond human mistakes.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final plague, the one that finally breaks Pharaoh's resistance and sets the Israelites free. But this plague is different. It's not just another natural disaster. It's a direct attack on what Pharaoh holds most dear, his firstborn son.
Yeah, this part of the story's always been tough for me. Why target innocent children? It seems too harsh, even for a God who's been showing his power through these plagues.
It's definitely the most challenging part of Exodus, and it's caused a lot of theological debate. Some scholars say this plague shows how serious Pharaoh's sin is, how much his actions have gone against God's order. They see it as a last resort, the only way to break the cycle of oppression and free the Israelites.
So it's not about punishing children. It's about going after what Pharaoh values most, hitting at the core of his power and control.
Exactly. And it's important to remember there's a warning given. God tells Moses to tell the Israelites to mark their doors with the blood of a lamb, a sign to protect their firstborn from the angel of death.
So Pharaoh has a choice. He can save his son, avoid this horrible loss.
Right. The death of the firstborn isn't inevitable. It happens because Pharaoh keeps defying God, refusing to listen to the warnings and acknowledge God's power.
It's a reminder that our choices have consequences. Even the most powerful people aren't above the laws of cause and effect.
And it's this final plague, this heartbreaking loss, that finally breaks Pharaoh. He realizes resisting is pointless, that he was wrong all along. He calls for Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night, begging them to leave, to take their people and go.
So in the end, it's not just about the Israelites being freed. It's also about Pharaoh being freed from his own pride and stubbornness.
That's what's so beautiful about the Exodus story. It's about liberation on many levels. A nation finding freedom, but also individuals breaking free from their own self-made chains. It's about recognizing there's something bigger than us and learning to surrender to a higher purpose.
It's a powerful message.
Yeah.
One that still means something today. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Exodus 10, I'm left thinking, what are the things we cling to? The fears and desires that keep us from being truly free? And are we willing to let go, to surrender to something bigger than ourselves, even if it means facing our deepest fears?
Big questions, but good ones, right?
Absolutely. And that's what makes exploring these ancient texts so rewarding. They challenge us, they make us think. And in the end, they help us understand ourselves a little better. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Exodus.